When I was originally diagnosed with a mental illness, I was in crisis, and I couldn't see how sick I was. I just felt like it was another issue that the world had with me. I remember the day the doctor told me what was wrong with me, but all I took away from that meeting was that I would likely never get better. The medications that I was on were a temporary fix and to aid me through the current crisis, but by no means were they going to help me long term. I was told that therapy was my best hope, and he suggested that I read the book Sometimes I Act Crazy. Now, that doesn't sound like a scary and intimidating book, but 5 pages in, I felt like I had no hope of ever living a normal life again. But to live the dreams that I had for myself, and after that, I couldn't bring myself to read up on my condition anymore. My dad often told me that there's no need to read Stephen King novels anymore, because by comparison to the documentation of BPD, the more he did they were scarier, the documentation on BPD. And the more my dad did to understand me in order to try and help me, the more, sorry, I'm very, very nervous, and personally, I get very shaky because of my anxiety, and just need a moment to compose myself. The more he did to try and help me, the more he started to suspect that I was never going to get better. Yet despite all the statistics saying that I would likely kill myself, I'm here and I'm better. I changed how I looked at the world, which in turn changed my entire world. And I have to thank my friends and family who, no matter how volatile and irrational I was, never stopped loving me and encouraging me that it was all going to be okay, and they never gave up trying to find me the help that I needed. I honestly can't explain my diagnosis to you because I don't really think it matters. It's because amidst all of the negativity and despair of my life at that time, I chose not to know. I chose not to really care what the doctor said was wrong with me, and don't get me wrong, I still have issues, and maybe they are a result of my illness, but at the end of the day, that's part of me. It is who I am as a person, and for whatever reason, I chose to ignore it all. I actively refused to admit to myself that I had a mental health problem. Since during the first few months after being diagnosed, I felt more sick, crazy, alone, and depressed than I'd ever felt in my entire life. It was then that I figured out that there was no way I could live a life dictated to me by the instability of my own mind. I had no idea if it was even possible, but I became determined to find a way. Even if it was for fleeting moments each day. It wasn't easy, and I think it was the hardest thing I ever did for myself, to give in to the idea that something was indeed wrong with me. It wasn't something like the flu that was tangible, that you could think of. It was something neat, like a misprinted coin. And does this make me any less of a person because I'm not normal? I don't think so. It wasn't until I finally found a therapist who not only had experience treating people with my condition, but was also trained in dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT, and with her help, I started to understand myself better, which forced me to take ownership for my situation. And when I did, I realized how many limitations I had placed on myself that were based solely on my perceptions of what was expected of me, and was judging situations based on my assumption of the outcome. Furthermore, I was unable to accept that other possible outcomes were possible. But I overcame that by exploring the 4 components of DBT. Each one helps me understand myself in a different way. Emotion regulation taught me how to control my emotions. This, coupled with distress tolerance techniques, allowed me to come off the medications, which was great. It was the first big step for me taking back control of my own thoughts. And then we looked at interpersonal effectiveness, which was how I interacted with others. I'm a horrible interpersonal person, and I realized then that I pushed a lot of people away from me, and I made my situation harder. And that was incredibly unpleasant to deal with. But then that was the perfect bridge to mindfulness, which at its core is accepting and not judging things. And it was this section of my therapy that really unlocked the future I always wanted for myself. But it was the hardest concept for me to apply. Judgments are everywhere and are strongly influenced by our interactions with society. I feel that we are almost programmed to judge everything that we do against all kinds of limits, except the ones that really matter, ourselves. I know for myself that at some point I stopped doing things for me, things that I enjoyed. And I struggled through my therapy sessions trying to understand that it was okay for me to want or to do things that went against the limitations I perceived were keeping me from exploring my interests. Oh, the liberation that brought with it. I started looking at everything differently, and it was as if for the first time I was meeting myself. Accepting myself for every imperfection, quirky trait, and label that I have. And I learned that there's no amount of makeup that can cover up crazy. And by accepting me for me and accepting others' judgments as nothing but their own, and not accepting it as a true reflection of myself, in this I gave myself back the power to choose my own future. And it's a power that we all have, and regardless of our afflictions, and even though at times we may not see that we have this power, it is within all of us. Accessing it might be the hardest thing we ever do, but it is things that challenge us the most that often have the biggest rewards. Understanding that the only limitations on our lives are the ones that we put there ourselves. I have no idea what the future holds for me and my ongoing battle with mental health. But I will tackle it as it comes, and when the fear and negativity start to creep into my thoughts, I will tell myself once more, nil desperandum in omnia paratus. Don't despair. You're prepared for anything. Thank you very much.